There is a kind of injustice that doesn't look like injustice at all. No shouting, no scandal, no dramatic collapse. From the outside, it almost looks reasonable. But from the inside, it feels like being erased right before the moment you were about to win. You don't lose because you were careless. You don't lose because you were behind. You lose because you were ahead in a way that made people uncomfortable. And the most painful part is this. You can feel it in your bones that if the game had continued just a little longer, the outcome would have changed. You didn't need to cheat. You didn't need to manipulate. You didn't even need recognition. All you needed was time. But time is the one thing the system refused to give you. People rarely talk about this kind of loss because it doesn't fit the usual narratives. There's no obvious villain. There's no clean mistake to point at. So the person who gets removed is left alone with a question that has no satisfying answer. What did I do wrong if everything I did was right? This happens most often to people who see patterns early, people who notice inefficiencies, people who sense contradictions long before they explode, people who don't just follow rules, but instinctively try to understand why the rules exist in the first place. They're not trying to rebel. They're not trying to dominate. They're trying to make things work better. And strangely enough, that's exactly what makes them dangerous. Because most systems are not designed to be optimized. They are designed to be preserved. They run on habit, on unspoken agreements, on power balances that depend on certain things never being questioned too deeply. When someone enters that space and starts quietly improving things, something shifts. Not immediately, not visibly, but the people who benefit from the old inefficiencies feel it. They sense that if this person stays long enough, certain roles will become unnecessary. Certain excuses will stop working. Certain illusions will collapse. So the system responds the only way it knows how. It doesn't attack the person head-on. That would draw attention. Instead, it slowly pulls them out of the center. Their voice matters a little less each time. Their ideas get acknowledged, then ignored. Their presence becomes optional. And one day, without a clear moment of conflict, they realize they're no longer in the game. What makes this especially cruel is that it often happens right when things are starting to align. The solution they've been building is finally clear. The insight they've been carrying is about to connect the dots for others. The momentum is real. And then, silence. The door closes quietly. No explanation. No final conversation. No opportunity to finish what they started. From the outside, people might say, maybe it just wasn't the right fit. Or, that's just how things go sometimes. But the person who lived it knows better. They weren't removed because they failed. They were removed because success, in their hands, would have exposed too much. This creates a very specific kind of inner conflict. Because you can't even be angry in a clean way. If you speak up, you sound bitter. If you explain yourself, you sound defensive. If you stay quiet, people assume you didn't care that much. So you carry the weight internally. You replay moments. You analyze conversations. You wonder if being less precise, less honest, less observant would have helped. And slowly, something dangerous happens. You begin to associate clarity with punishment. You start questioning whether truth is actually valuable in environments built on comfort. Whether being correct matters when being convenient is rewarded more consistently. You notice how often people who are louder, vaguer, or more agreeable advance faster. Not because they're better, but because they don't disrupt anything. They don't make anyone feel exposed. They don't force hard conversations. They don't threaten existing hierarchies. They fit. And the realization hits hard. Most games are not won by the most capable player. They're won by the player who understands which truths to hide. For someone who values precision, integrity, and internal consistency, this is deeply destabilizing. Because their instinct is to refine, not to perform. To solve, not to posture. To make things accurate, not just acceptable. And yet, accuracy often comes at a cost. Especially when it reveals that many people in power are coasting on ambiguity. So the system does what it always does with people like this. It removes them early enough that the threat never becomes undeniable. No scandal, no accountability, just a quiet replacement. Someone else steps into the space they cleared. Someone else uses the structure they built. Someone else benefits from the groundwork without ever acknowledging its source. And life goes on. This is where the sense of injustice deepens. Because the world doesn't just take the win away. It takes the proof. There's no moment where everyone turns around and says, "You were right." There's no redemption arc. There's just the lingering awareness that something unfinished is now being used without you. That's a hard thing to carry. Over time, people who experience this repeatedly start to change. They become more reserved, more selective, less eager to contribute early, not because they lack ideas, but because they've learned that visibility can be dangerous. They stop offering solutions before they're asked. They stop correcting obvious flaws. They let inefficiencies exist longer than they want to. And that restraint isn't weakness. It's survival. But there's a quiet grief that comes with it. Grief for the version of themselves that believed doing things well would naturally lead to being valued. Grief for the projects that could have been transformative if they'd been allowed to mature. Grief for the moments where winning was close enough to touch, but never permitted. What makes this story resonate so deeply with people is that it taps into a shared, rarely articulated experience. So many have felt this, but never had the language for it. They knew something was unfair, but couldn't explain why. They sensed they were pushed aside, but couldn't point to a single wrongdoing. This kind of exclusion leaves no fingerprints. And that's why it's so isolating. But here's the part that often gets overlooked. Being removed early doesn't mean you were wrong. In many cases, it's the clearest signal that you were right in a way the system couldn't absorb. Not all environments deserve your best work. Not all games are worth winning. Some structures are so invested in staying the same that anyone who could truly improve them has to be eliminated before the improvement becomes visible. Understanding this doesn't erase the pain, but it reframes it. It shifts the narrative from personal failure to structural resistance. And that shift matters, because it allows you to stop internalizing the injustice, to stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What kind of space would actually let this part of me thrive?" People like this don't need louder voices. They need better arenas. Spaces where clarity is an asset, not a threat. Where truth isn't filtered through politics. Where winning doesn't require pretending. And those spaces do exist, but they are rarer, and they require discernment to find. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, it's because it's touching something real. Something many people carry quietly. And if you're listening to this and thinking, "That's exactly what happened to me," then you already know something important. You weren't removed because you were insignificant. You were removed because, given enough time, you would have changed the outcome. If this resonated, if it put words to something you felt but never said out loud, let that be a signal. You're not alone in this experience. And sharing it might be the first step toward finding the spaces where being right doesn't get you erased, but finally lets you finish what you started.